Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the March webinar presented by the Recruitment, Training, and Support Center at the Federation for Children with Special Needs. My name is Janie Kreco, and I am the Training and Support Specialist for RTSC. Our presenter today is Ashley Coates, who coordinates social skills groups throughout Massachusetts. She's also the Information Specialist for the Parent Training and Information Center and coordinates the call center at the Federation. She's involved with the Massachusetts Down Syndrome Congress and is a Len Fellow at Boston Children's Hospital. Our technical producer today is Emily Gaudet. If you are interested in learning more about the Federation, please go to our website at fcsn.org and explore all the different programs and training opportunities. Our webinar today is being recorded and will be available on the Federation's YouTube channel at youtube.com/FCSN videos. If you have a particular behavior you would like to discuss with the panel and the audience today, please type it into the toolbox and I will present it to Ashley as time allows. The audience can also add their ideas regarding the behavior, and I will add it to the discussion if appropriate. Okay, we're ready to go. Thank you, Ashley, for being here.
Thank you so much for having me again. So today we are going to talk about some effective communication strategies for students that have challenging behaviors. I was able to do last month's presentation on discipline, so for those of you that were with us last month, I think this is a great way for us to follow up because most of the kiddos that we're working with who are having discipline issues are having them because of some challenging behaviors. So things that you can expect from us today is ideas about behavior in general and what that looks like. The idea of a combat mentality and avoiding getting into a power struggle. We'll talk about the difference between a behavior and a symptom of a disability. Ways and ideas for us to change the conversation. There's no crying in baseball. There's a good visual for that, so you'll get to see what we mean there. And then ways that we can control our own emotions when working with kiddos with disabilities or who have trauma history. And then we'll look at some strategies and skill building ideas for parents and educators. And one of those looks like a red light, green light, so you'll also get to see that. And then we'll have some opportunities to practice, and I'm hoping that we'll also have time for feedback and questions from the audience because I think it's a great way for us to learn how we can use these ideas in our everyday life. So behaviorally speaking, the idea of misbehavior as a symptom. So we really want to think about the fact that for students that have disabilities or students who have a trauma history, a lot of times their behaviors are a symptom of something much bigger rather than just an action. We'll also look at some of the ideas about how we're translating and sending messages through our behaviors and through the student and child behavior. We'll take a look at what I mean by function of behavior. So why are we doing the behavior? What is it actually trying to tell us? And then there's a big focus today on the idea that the only behavior you can control is your own. So we'll look at some strategies for adults and how we can better communicate with the students and children that we're working with to make sure that they're able to do their best in terms of meeting your expectations. And then when we talk about behavior, I think it's important to note that behavior can be changed. We're going to look at behavior today as a skill. So when we're talking about it that way, if we can change the behavior, we can do it through practice. So this visual for us today talks a little bit about the function of behavior from, I guess this is kind of from an ABA perspective, an applied behavior analysis perspective, but what I really want to look at is less of what we're talking about in terms of function and more about what that looks like. So a lot of times people will wonder, well, why is someone behaving that way? And some of the examples we have is things like attention, or they're trying to get access to something they really want. They're trying to avoid doing something, so escape doing something they don't want to do. And then also for that automatic reinforcement. So when something happens, what happens next? That's that automatic reinforcement. What I think is important for us to note today is that a lot of times the function of behavior and what it might look like doesn't necessarily always explain the why behind the behavior. So we might think that a student's doing something because they want to get attention, but what it really looks like is that that student is missing a skill to get something achieved. They're trying to find another way to get the attention of somebody, but it's not necessarily a negative thing. So I think if we can look at it that way today and kind of have this idea that behavior, is a function of something and it's a way for us to communicate, that will help us to better understand some of the concepts we're going to talk about today. So for those of you that are listening today, I wonder if in working with students or with your own children, if you've ever said or thought that a child or teen, adolescent you're working with was any of these things. So have you ever said they were unmotivated, defiant, manipulative, or attention-seeking? I teach social skills groups and I get to work with a lot of different families and parents, and a lot of times these are things that I hear. I also hear them from educators that I work with that, I know they have this disability, but they're defiant. I think they're just trying to manipulate me. They're trying to get me to do something that I don't want to do, and so those things are quite possible. There could be some of all of these things in the kids that we're working with, but there's also a good chance that it's more about a lack of a skill, and so we might need to change the conversation. So let's look at some ideas about how we can change that internal conversation we're having and come up with some different approaches to work with these students. So behavior is communication. This is probably the biggest point that we'll talk about today, in the idea that for kiddos who have challenges communicating verbally or who don't necessarily communicate the way that we're used to, their behavior is their way of telling us what they need, what they want, and what they expect from us. One of the resources that I go back to very often is Dr. Ross Green's The Explosive Child, and he has some wonderful points in there, but the two big ones that always come back for me is this idea of kids do well when they can, and that doing well is always preferable to not doing well. So when kiddos lack the skills necessary to have appropriate behaviors, as we often see with kids with a trauma history or who have had interruptions in their cognitive development, we end up seeing undesirable behaviors. And contrary to what we might think sometimes, kids don't want to be bad. Children are really seeking approval and positive reinforcement and praise. So the idea that they're, being manipulative, or the idea that they're doing some of the things that we talked about on the previous slide, is really not necessarily always true. So I want to encourage you guys, as you're listening today, to think about the last time that you disappointed someone and what did that feel like, or the last time that you made a mistake you couldn't reverse. So things as simple as maybe burning dinner and not having a backup, something else in the freezer. Or maybe you overscheduled yourself and you forgot to drop off dinner to a sick neighbor, or you forgot to pick up your kiddo at daycare. You thought maybe it was somebody else's turn. And I wonder if at that moment and with that feeling you said to yourself, you know what, I think I'll try and do that again tomorrow. And my guess would be that you're not feeling that way, because letting someone down, being yelled at, receiving consequences, all of these things make us feel bad, and realistically, feeling bad doesn't feel good. So we're not trying to make that happen for us. And our kiddos aren't feeling that way either. So here is another idea for us to think about. When kiddos are unhappy, they let us know it. And how do they let us know it? And this kind of reminds me to think a little bit about development and how kids are born being able to tell us when they're unhappy as babies. If they have a wet diaper, they cry, and that's how they let us know it. If they're hungry, they cry, and that's how they let us know it. For kids, as they get older, their behaviors and their actions are letting us know that something is not working for them. And I think in those instances, and as we're thinking about behavior as communication, we really need to think about some of these ideas of, is there a missing skill? Is there something they don't know how to do? And that's how this is how they're showing us, is through their behavior. We're also thinking about expectations and what's the child and parent or caregiver teacher expectation, and is that the same as the students? Because sometimes it isn't, and that's where we get into trouble in terms of people feeling like things are not happening the way that they want them to. And then now what? What do? We know the kiddo's unhappy, we're seeing these behaviors, and how can we move forward and move on from that? So I have a little story to go with this, and it's one I tell all the time, and I apologize if any of you have heard it from me before, but it's one of my favorites. So when I first met my husband and we moved in together, I came home from work one day after a really long day, and he came up to me, greeted me at the door, and said, "I loaded the dishwasher." And it was literally like he was waiting for me to give him a gold star sticker for completing a chore on his chart. And I was like, okay, great, thanks for loading the dishwasher. That was nice of you. You use dishes. You live here. And so we go to bed. I'm super tired, and he leaves for work in the morning. I get up, and I go to empty the dishwasher, and I open it, and all of the dishes and all of the cups are facing upwards. So I have a bunch of cups in my dishwasher full of dirty, gross dishwater. And now I'm thinking about how fast I can pull back that gold sticker I gave him last night for putting the dishes in. And I'm angry. I'm having all of these really, severe feelings. And I wasn't thinking about the dishwasher. I was thinking, oh my goodness, I don't know if this is going to work. My relationship might be over. He just unpacked. I just cleaned out a drawer for him, and this isn't going to work. And not because of the dishwasher, but because I all of a sudden had all these other feelings going through me of, how is he going to be a parent? How is he going to take care of our kids someday if he doesn't even know how to load a dishwasher? And they're kind of ridiculous things when you think about it, but in my head, this is what's happening. And so poor Colin comes home from work that day, and he walks in, and the first thing I say is, "Are you kidding me with that dishwasher?" And he's like, "Oh, what do you mean?" And I go on, and I'm, going on a tangent about, gosh, you need to pay attention. You need to have attention to detail. This is important. I wasted my time unloading and reloading. And he looks at me and says, "Ash, it's just the dishwasher." And, for me, I had a really hard time with that, because for me, it wasn't about the dishwasher. It was all these other thoughts that I had going through my head. But he didn't know that. And so I was angry at him for not knowing what it is that I expected from him. And if we're going to be working with kids and we need to communicate with them, we need to keep in mind that sometimes people can't understand what we tell them or what we want them to know if we don't actually tell them. And that's kind of a traditional way of thinking. And so I think what we have to consider is that with all of the kids we work with, we don't want to oversimplify. I was mad that my husband, was like, "It's just a dishwasher," because for me it wasn't just a dishwasher. So the next time, you're working with your child or you're working with one of your students and you say to them, "Don't be upset, it's just a crayon," or "It's just a blue marker, it's just whatever," remember that for them, in their head, they might have something else entirely going on. And I think we need to really think about that before we make a decision to go forward with some sort of, reaction. And then, in addition to that, we have to stop thinking about some of our conversations as a sale, and we can't discount other people's emotions. So if your child is very upset about something, if something seems like a really big deal to them, the very worst thing we can do is discount that and say, "You know what, it's not a big deal, it's not important," because to them it really is. And as soon as we say that to them, we end up getting into a power struggle, because now you're disagreeing about the importance of something. So, my husband and I have been married now for 2.5 years, and I will say he's much better at loading the dishwasher. But what I also learned is that when, months later, we went to go visit my in-laws for the first time, and we're having dinner, and afterwards I said, "Oh, you know what, let me take care of the dishes." And I stood up, and his mom said, "No, I got it. I have a really specific way I like to load the dishwasher." And in that moment, I realized that for Colin, he had never learned that skill, which seemed ridiculous to me because you're 25 years old, load the dishwasher, but he hadn't learned it before. So I think if we can think about the idea that some of our kiddos are missing skills that we think they should have, that we assume they should have, we can possibly avoid some of these power struggles and challenging behaviors. And then, with that being said, I also think we have to think about how feelings play into what it is that we're talking about. And years ago, I was talking to a woman who's a psychologist, and I had said, so-and-so makes me feel this way. And I remember her very clearly looking at me and saying, you know what? Other people can't make you feel anyway. You choose to feel that way. And it was kind of a profound thing that she said to me, and in that moment I was like, no, this person makes me feel like that. But it's not necessarily always the way it is. And so if we're thinking about the idea of perspective, we also have to think about feelings. And I work with a lot of parents, and some of the things that they tell me about their kiddos and their challenging behaviors are that they feel fearful. They're afraid, of some of their behaviors the child is having. They're angry. They're embarrassed. That's one that I get often. My sister's kids don't do this, and nobody else understands what's happening at Thanksgiving when my kid can only eat off of a blue plate or something like that. And they get defensive. I don't know if any of you guys listening out there have ever felt this when somebody's, questioning something, a choice that you did, that you feel a little defensive. They feel helpless. And this is a really scary trap to get into, is this idea that, there's nothing I can do, and so I'm just not going to do anything. And today I'm hoping that we'll give you some ideas so that if you are someone that's feeling a little bit helpless with your kiddo's behavior, that you really can, come up with some strategies today and just try them, see how it works. I have a lot of moms and dads who tell me they feel sad when their kids behave a certain way. And I think it probably goes back up to some of the other emotions that we talk about them being embarrassed or being defensive. But sadness is definitely something that comes with having a kiddo that doesn't act the way that you expect them to. And then anxious. I've seen moms who have serious, or dads who have serious anxiety about, anticipating a negative behavior, and we're going on vacation, or we're going to this very important thing for my job, and I'm very anxious about it. They might feel a little defeated, which I think kind of goes back to the helplessness idea of I can't win, and so I'm just not going to play anymore. And then there's this whole idea of shame and how parents and teachers and adults feel shameful that their kiddos are acting a certain way and there's nothing they can do about it. And that all of these things above there can also lead to a feeling of resentment. And I think we have to be careful not to resent a child for a behavior that they maybe can't control, or not to resent, your spouse or your partner or someone else who you feel like they're not doing a good job of understanding what it is that you're going through. And all of these things really relate back not only to the way that we communicate with our students, but also the way that we communicate with people in general. And so I really feel like emotions are totally natural, they're expected, and they're okay. It's okay to feel any of these things, and the important thing is really just to identify the way that you're feeling, feel them, plan for them, but then be able to move on from it. Because if you're consistently fearful, if you're consistently angry, if you're not expecting that embarrassment or sadness, it's going to be really hard for you to move forward and to do something different the next time. So think about why that's so hard, and then come up with a plan for how you can go from there. One of my very favorite movies is A League of Their Own, and if you've seen this, I think it's something that people quote all the time, is that there's no crying in baseball. And so Tom Hanks is the coach of this women's baseball team, and one of his players is very emotional all the time, and she's crying and she's upset, and he says there's no crying in baseball, and he's angry when he's telling her this. And it makes me think of, kiddos that I've worked with or students that I've worked with, and their behavior seems to affect me. I'm irritated by the way that they're acting. Or I have parents tell me, if he makes that noise one more time, if they cry one more time, just stop doing that. And then we have to really factor in how our own emotions impact our ability to communicate. And especially, in ideas where mom or dad or the teacher, their own emotions seem to be playing a big role in the emotions of their child. And I worked with a wonderful, wonderful family, and their little one has some pretty serious behaviors. And what I noticed is that when they would come into my group, I could tell just from them walking in what kind of a day it had been. And I could tell that, whether it had been a pretty successful day or whether it had been a challenging day. And the thing was, I couldn't tell that from the student that I was working with. I could tell it from Mom. And I could tell by the look on her face of whether it had been exhausting or whether it had been a successful day. And I had this mom say to me one time that her little guy had had a really, really bad day. And he was not good at school. She had to pick him up early. He had a big meltdown when he got home. And she said, bud, you're not going to be able to go to group with Miss Ashley tonight. And he said to her, don't worry, Mom, I'll hold it together for Miss Ashley. And, I laughed because I thought it was kind of cute and whatever. Mom did not think that was funny. She was thinking to herself, why can't you hold it together for me? And she said in that moment she cried and cried and cried because she was feeling like, gosh, I don't understand what's happening and I don't know what to do. And so he did come to group that day, and I looked at Mom and I said, it looks like you've had, a tough day. And she started crying, and then I looked over and he started crying, and so Mom's emotions were really impacting him. And I don't think in that moment when you're feeling that way that it's easy to shut that off. I don't expect anyone to be able to completely, cease their own emotions for the sake of their child. But what I do think is that if we at least are aware of it, if we can at least see how your mood, your emotions, your word choice impacts your child and the student that you're working with, you can maybe make more thoughtful choices, or you can think about ways to anticipate how to have a better outcome because you're in charge of your own emotions. So lots of kiddos that I work with do well with visuals, and I think that I really do well with them too. So I have this kind of idea of stop and slow down and proceed, and we've seen this with a lot of students. A lot of kids have, those cards that they use, and they say, you're in the red zone, or you're in a yellow zone, you're in a green zone. But what I want to do is I want the parents and the teachers, professionals that are listening today to kind of think of this as their own red light, green light card, something that you can use, and something that will remind you when you're working with a kiddo whose behavior is really challenging for you and you don't quite know what to do, to picture this, to picture your very own red light, green light, and think about ways that you can use it. And so we're going to learn a little bit more about what I mean from that, but I want you to really look at this for a second and put it in your brain so that when you need it the next time, when you're quick to act and react, you have something that you can do. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to stop, we're going to look, and we're going to listen. This is something that we talk about with students all the time. It's a skill that we teach people from the very first day that, they're out in the community, is that the most important thing when you're out there is that you need to stop and look and listen and be aware. And so for parents and adults working with these kiddos, we need to stop, take a second, assess the situation. And the first thing we're going to do, of course, is we're going to look for potential safety issues, because sometimes those things come up. So maybe it's busy streets or unsafe objects, vulnerable other kiddos, pets, and try and secure that situation. So we're going to really be aware of our surroundings, and then we're going to listen a little bit. Are they saying something? What are they trying to say, either with their words or their actions, and what are they trying to tell you? And I think sometimes what we do here is, even if we are stopping, we're looking, we're listening, we're assuming that they're behaving a certain way because of something. And I think that's a dangerous trap for us to get into, to assume, oh, you must be acting that way because. So for instance, if you had siblings and you're assuming that your child is yelling at his sister because she won't share, that's a really big assumption to make, because now what happens, you go over and you start to interact with them and you kind of put yourself in the situation and you don't really know if that's the case. So what I'm thinking is that while we're stopping, while we're looking, while we're listening, we should also ask the question. And I don't know if in every situation the student is going to be able to answer us and to say, I'm behaving this way because. That's not necessarily realistic. But it does give you an opportunity to look and listen and ask them and maybe give them some keywords. Are you acting this way because? Or what is it that you're struggling with, so that they can you're really giving them permission to be part of this conversation and to be part of the behavior and then the action that follows it. And so after we've stopped, we really need to slow down. And I know that that's not always possible. I know that there's often a sense of urgency when someone's having a meltdown or they're being unsafe, but we really don't need to rush it in every situation. And so when we can, I think it's important for us to stay calm and to think about the behavior and what is he or she trying to communicate. And I have a great example. I don't know if any of you guys listening today have ever read the book Shut Up About Your Perfect Kid or follow them on Facebook. But if you haven't, I would definitely recommend taking a look at it, because it's this forum of parents across the world, and what they do is they post questions about their child or their child's behavior. And so last week I was perusing their page and I saw this mom, and she's talking about how they were in a grocery store and she has a son with autism who's 11 or 12, and it seemed to come out of nowhere that he had this big meltdown, and we are talking a screaming, throwing things. They ended up needing to call an ambulance. They went to the hospital, and they were going to admit this student for a 48-hour observation to try and get his behavior under control. And the first thing they did when he got to the hospital is they gave him some lunch or some sort of a snack. And the mom said, that it was like nothing she'd ever seen before. It was like all of a sudden all the negative behaviors, the tears, the, heavy breathing, all of this stuff stopped. And she kind of looked at him and was like, you seem like you're doing better. And he said to her, Mom, I only acted that way because I was hungry. And now I can picture this poor mother being like, are you kidding me? We were in a grocery store. You couldn't have given me a heads up that, that you were hungry. And maybe we could have stopped some of the stuff that happened. And I understand that when you're in public, it's much more challenging for you to slow down because of all those feelings we were talking about, the anxiety and the shame and the embarrassment, and gosh, people are watching me, and they're judging my parenting or they're judging my child. And so when you're in these public situations, I know it's much more difficult, but what I think is that if we're able to, it's really helpful for us to just take a minute and think about what could possibly be happening right now. What could they possibly be trying to tell me? And so, if I were working with this mom, I might say, hey, it's a good idea for you to carry some extra granola bars with you. And if he seems like he's having a tough time, just hand it to him. And if it happens to be a hunger thing, then he'll take advantage of the fact that you have something there. If it's not a hunger thing, then you can move on. But at least you've crossed off something that it very well could be. So when you're able to slow it down, and part of what we'll talk about a little bit later is this idea of planning for things that are coming, but that's definitely easier said than done sometimes. And I think if we can just keep it in our mind that maybe we're in a yellow light situation and we just need to slow down and see what's happening, we could avoid some of the issues that we have. So as we're talking about this idea of stopping and slowing down, I think we need to also focus on the idea that behaviors escalate, that very rarely do we go from baseline, this happy kiddo who's doing really well, to a full-blown meltdown. And I don't know if any of you guys have ever seen a child that looks like that before, but it's kind of terrifying. And so if you're looking at it as, like a behavior hill or a behavior mountain, you might think to yourself, okay, in order for us to get from baseline to get to a meltdown, we have to climb up this hill. And a lot of times people will call that triggers that are maybe happening. There might be some environmental things that are going on, but we need to really think about how they're getting there and see if we can catch it before it gets to that full meltdown. So that also goes to say that when we're in a meltdown and we're getting back to baseline, we don't just go from the top meltdown, and then everything's fine and we're back at baseline. We have to go back down that hill, okay? So if we can think about these middle sections here and the idea that behavior escalates. So it starts somewhere and then it gets to a peak point, and then it also has to have time to de-escalate. And what I worry sometimes is that as our child's in a meltdown, before they've reached that baseline point, we're thinking about how are we going to teach them something right now? How are we going to de-escalate this behavior, explain to them why it's wrong, give them a strategy for the next time? And I'm just not sure that that's the right time for us to be doing that. So I think what we need to do is we need to remember that those middle sections there are not the best time to teach. And in that meltdown moment, it's not the best time to teach. And I think if we can remember that, and we can remember that we need to wait until our kiddo is back down to his baseline, because what we know about brain development, what we know about neurology is that when we are in those meltdown moments, when we are at our most stressed out, we're not able to learn. We're not capable of taking in new information. And so really moms and dads and teachers are really wasting their breath at that point. So if you can picture your stoplight, and if you can remember to slow down and try not to, use this as a teaching moment, I think you'll find that it's definitely more successful in terms of trying to teach a kiddo when they get back to that baseline point. And so if we've stopped and we've slowed down and the light has turned green, I think about it kind of being in traffic, that even when the light turns green, you often always still look left and right, because I don't know what those other people and those other drivers are doing, and I want to make sure that I'm proceeding with caution. And so for our students and for our kiddos, when we're talking about that, we need to think about behavior and behavior management and communication as a process, and that moving forward takes time and it takes patience. And I think we also need to remember that we want to, if we're stopping and we're slowing down and we're thinking about it, that we're going to move forward with caution, and that we're not going to have super high expectations for our kiddos right after they have a meltdown, because it's exhausting. It's exhausting for you, it's exhausting for them, and we want to wait until everybody's back at their best before we start talking about what happened or how it happened or what we can do next. And so I have a lot of families that tell me, well, we need a consequence. What are we going to do? How are we going to, work on this? How are they going to know what they did was wrong? And so the idea of communicating consequences and consequences in general, there's kind of two main points that I always focus on, is that effective consequences need to be both clear and consistent. So the child needs to understand why they're receiving the consequence, why they're being punished, if that's how, some people say it, is this idea of punishment. And I think sometimes that we don't do a good job of explaining to the child why what's happening next is happening. It's kind of like that old school idea of, wait until your father gets home. Well, for some students who are typically developing or who have the skills necessary, that might be okay, because now you've put the fear in them and they know that they're going to get in trouble when their dad gets home. But for other kids who have disabilities or who are struggling, who maybe didn't learn these skills or had interruptions from trauma or whatnot in their development, then that kind of consequence of wait until your father gets home isn't necessarily going to be the most effective, because what happens is now sometimes hours have gone by and the dad comes home, mom tells him, and now the kid's like, wait a minute, I don't even remember what I did. So I think we need to kind of focus on this idea of making sure that the consequences we give, if that's a decision we make, is that they're clear and that they're consistent. So when you do this, this is what happens, and it happens every time, regardless of where you are or how it's happening. And when I talk about the importance of consequences, I really think about natural consequences as being the most effective consequence. And I have parents say to me all the time, Ashley, he needs a consequence or he'll never learn. And what I want to try and explain is that sometimes consequences have occurred and we don't even realize it. So that's what I'm talking about when I say natural consequences. So from a definition standpoint, a natural consequence is something that happens in response to a child's behavior without parental involvement. So it's something that mom or dad or even the teacher is not imposing. Something that happens through nature, through society, or through situations. So when I talk about nature, I mean things like if you don't wear a coat and you go outside and it's cold, you're cold. And that's a natural consequence. You chose not to wear your coat and now you're cold. It could be something, when I say by society, I mean, like for instance, if you're behaving a certain way and people are staring at you, and if you are someone who's able to feel embarrassment or you're someone who's able to feel that, then you can understand that that's a natural consequence of your behavior. And then also in situations. So it could be a situational type thing. So maybe you didn't want to pack your backpack and your mom packed it for you and you forgot your gym shoes, or she forgot your gym shoes because you didn't pack it yourself. You can't have gym that day. So those are kind of those natural consequences. And I go back and kind of think about the student that we talked about earlier who had a meltdown in the grocery store. And maybe he really wanted macaroni and cheese for dinner that night. But they get home and he's had a meltdown and they had to leave the grocery store and he wants mac and cheese, but there isn't any. And now we say to him, not so much, hey, you behaved badly and you can't have macaroni and cheese. It's, hey, we didn't get a chance to finish our grocery shopping, so unfortunately tonight we're going to have grilled cheese instead. And that to me is more of a natural consequence because we're saying we didn't do what we needed to do and now we can't have what we wanted to have. So if we can kind of work on thinking about natural consequences, if we can be observant of what they are, I think you'll find that it's definitely a better way to help students see what they need to do and how they need to do it. And in order for us to really understand these things, we definitely have to acknowledge that these take practice. And the things that I'm talking about are communication skills. So if we were practicing anything else, if we were practicing soccer, if we were practicing, tennis, we have to practice that to get better. So as parents and as adults working with kids with these types of challenging behaviors, we need to practice too. And so here are some ideas and some tips for taming that temper or working with a kiddo who's struggling. So we're going to go through these in a little bit more detail, but we're going to talk about the importance of avoiding no, giving choices, anticipating outbursts and having a plan, being flexible, and not taking it personally. And so in my little pictures to the side there, you can say that it's not necessarily, I think, practice makes perfect, but practice makes progress. And so if you're, as a parent or as an adult who's working with these students, can acknowledge the fact that there are some skills that you can work on too, it's more likely that the outcome is going to be better because you're working on teaching a skill and you're being taught a skill at the same time. And then the end result is that everybody knows and everybody has clearer expectations. So let's look at the first strategy of avoiding no and what that looks like. And I think I hear it and I see it, and honestly I still do it sometimes all the time, is when a kid has a behavior that you don't want, you tell them, no, don't do that, or stop doing that. And so what I want to recommend that we try is changing the verbiage. Okay, so we're still having the same conversation, we're just changing how we say it. So instead of saying, no running, try saying, let's walk. And so the message is the same, but it avoids that idea of it being a combative conversation, because when I say no, what's the likelihood that the student's going to be like, oh, okay, no problem, let me walk. It's not there. And so what we need to do is we really need to make sure that we're setting the expectation, so we're telling them what we want them to do. So instead of not running, we're telling them we want you to walk. I also use things like walking feet or anything like that, but it helps to avoid the defiant power struggle there, and it helps to ensure that the child absolutely 100% knows the expectation. And then I also want to think about this idea of giving choices. And what I think happens sometimes with choices is that we unknowingly give a choice that isn't a possibility. So we'll say, okay, do you want to get ready for school now? And the answer is typically no. Nope, don't want to get ready for school. And I honestly don't blame them. But what we need to do is make sure that the choices that we're giving are actual choices, choices that they can do and that they can choose. And so let's look at an idea for that one. So instead of, saying, do you want to get ready for school, let's try, it's time to get ready for school. Do you want to brush teeth first or pack your backpack? So both of those things need to get done, but in this position, the child has the power now. They can say, you know what, I want to pack my backpack first, and then I'll brush my teeth. And I think it reminds us that both of these tasks are going to get done, but the child definitely has the choice here. And I will have parents tell me, okay, they're going to say, I don't want to do either of those things. And sometimes that definitely happens. And I think it's okay to follow up with a sequence vocabulary or to put that back in, put it into terms that they can understand. So, okay, first we're going to brush our teeth, and then we're going to pack your backpack. And if at that point we're still struggling and we still can't get them to do it, then we can add in a then there. So, first we're going to brush your teeth, then we're going to pack your backpack, and then you're going to get to have your favorite cereal for lunch, for breakfast, oh gosh. And if we still aren't getting the feedback that we want, let's do some options where we can say, what's the natural consequence going to be. So if we don't brush our teeth and pack our backpacks, we won't have time for cereal, and then we won't be able, you'll have to have a granola bar or something like that. So we're going to try and save some time for questions. So as I'm going through these, think about the idea that if you have a specific situation, and maybe we can come up with a strategy together for how we can work on that. So the next strategy I want to think about is this idea of anticipating outbursts and having a plan. So I'm going to go back to our mom in the grocery store, and I want to think about her for a second and the idea that, okay, after this hospitalization, she probably is going to anticipate that hunger is something that causes a negative behavior. So she might pack a snack. She might have some sort of an idea of what to expect. So let's try this. If we're going back to the school, I bet it's hard to get ready for school when you feel rushed. Let's pack your backpack before we go to bed, and then we won't need to do it in the morning. So we're really thinking about, the feeling of, it's probably causes anxiety. I hate to feel rushed as an adult. I hate to feel rushed at work or at home. And so we have to plan for that. And this is a skill that we can teach our kiddos. We can say, you know what, I noticed that sometimes before school, it seems like you're having a tough time. Is that because you feel rushed? And if the answer is yes, then okay, let's come up with a plan together. Let's think about how we can pack our backpack before we go to bed, and then guess what? We don't have to do it in the morning, and we'll have more time for something that they do want to do. So planning and anticipating when there's going to be a struggle seems to be a successful strategy for a lot of families I've worked with. And then we have this idea of being flexible. And I'll tell you, I talk with my kiddos in my groups about them being flexible all the time, about kids having, flexible expectations and being willing to, go with the flow. But in this instance, the person that I'm talking about being flexible, or the people, is definitely the adult in this situation. And so let's try this idea. Sounds like you don't want to brush your teeth right now. Let's pack our backpack, have breakfast, and then brush your teeth. And then once your teeth are brushed, you can play basketball before school. So realistically, we have to decide what's really important. And I definitely believe that dental hygiene is very important. I do, and I want to make sure that all of our kids are brushing their teeth before they go to school. But I also understand that, I don't know if they have to do that right now. And one of the things that I think about every time I do this, and kind of a quick anecdotal story, is when I first started working with kids with special needs, I was 18 and I was nannying for a wonderful family, and we went to Subway for lunch, and the little guy I worked with was 6 years old and had autism, and we got a kid's meal. It had like half of a ham sandwich, a fruit roll-up, and a milk. And he said, I want my fruit roll-up, and I said, nope, you have to have your sandwich first. And I don't know how many times I've heard other parents or other people say, nope, no dessert before you have this. And I get it. We want them to eat their lunch, and we want them to, get the nutrients that they need. But what happened in this situation is that I wasn't being flexible. he wasn't going to be flexible, and so what he did is he stood up on the table in Subway and he screamed, "Help save me." And this was lunchtime in a busy area. There was tons of people in there, and now I'm feeling all those feelings we were talking about. I'm feeling embarrassed. I'm feeling a little defeated. I'm actually feeling nervous that someone's going to call the police and think that I stole this child. And what ended up happening is that you better believe he got that fruit roll-up, because I was like, "Get off the table, I will give you your fruit roll-up." And realistically, what does it matter? If he wants the fruit roll-up, if it's going to make us have a successful social outing, then really, it's kind of okay with me. And I know that's that whole thing of, well, then he wins, then he wins. And I hate to have the idea that when someone wins, someone loses. And I would say you win too, because you don't have a kid screaming, "Help save me" on the table in Subway. And so think about those things and decide what's really important. Because realistically, if he didn't finish his whole sandwich, then okay, no problem. We'll eat your sandwich when you get in the car. You'll be hungry later and it'll be there. So think about what's really important and decide whether it's an opportunity for you to be flexible. And then the last one that we're going to talk about is this idea of don't take it personally. And I know that's another one that's much easier said than done. But sometimes what happens is that when our kiddos are misbehaving, or when kids we're working with are not doing things that we expect them to do, we take it personally. And so what I want to encourage you guys to do today is to remind yourself that my child's behavior is not a reflection of who I am as a parent or an educator. The behavior is just that. It's a behavior, and if we believe all the stuff we've talked about today, the behavior is a result of a lagging skill. So try this instead. My child's behavior is a result of a missing skill, and I will work to help teach him or her to learn, to do, to act, to behave differently. And I think that this is probably one of the things that really hits home for me, is that I work with a lot of parents that feel bad about the fact that their kid doesn't behave the same way that everyone else does, or that they don't have the ability to calm them down in the same way that other people do. And I think if we can remind ourselves, and if you're sitting in a place where you can say it to yourself right now, I would like you to do that. We can't tell if you're doing it, but I would like it. My child's behavior is not a reflection of who I am as a parent or who I am as an educator. So really think about that. It's not personal. This student is not behaving this way because they are trying to make you upset. They're not doing this because they're trying to, get you angry so that you'll react. They're doing it because they're missing a skill, because they don't have the ability to do it any differently. And, after today, this is good, because now you're able to also practice these skills, and then you can help them to meet that expectation. And so we're going to have some time for questions, but what I want to do is really, really remind everybody that not only do kids do well when they can, but parents do well when they can. Educators do well when they can. And it's important for you guys to make sure that you also have the skills necessary and that you have the strategies necessary to provide the support and to model the behavior that you're expecting from your students. So I'm going to leave this slide up there because I really want people to focus on it. But if we have time, I think we should see if there's any questions or situational things that have come up as you guys have been listening today.
Okay. Thank you so much, Ashley. We do have a couple of questions, and they're continuing to come in. One of the people that asked a question immediately when this began, I'm thinking she really needs some help with this one.
Okay, let's start here.
It says that her concerns are about the behaviors like grabbing at staff or parents' arms or throwing objects on the part of a 16-year-old very strong boy. And what are some strategies? What would be your action plan for that?
Sure. So, I think when I hear that, the first thing that I think about is the safety component of it, because you mentioned that he's an older child, that he's pretty strong, he's probably getting bigger, and it's much easier for us to think of strategies when the kids are smaller and we can literally, physically overpower them. But I think what we need to figure out is, so if he's grabbing at staff, or he's grabbing at their parents, why is he doing that? What is he trying to to get across. And so let's think about the function of the behavior. It sounds like if we're grabbing at you, I'm trying to get your attention. So I don't know what the student has for verbal ability. I don't know if he's able to communicate verbally or not. But I would probably, start with some sort of a consistent phrase that you can use that says, tell him what it is. I don't like it when you grab me. Did you need me for something? Is there something I can help you with? And I think we have to make sure that he knows that what he's doing is not okay, so let's set up the expectation, and the expectation is that we're not going to grab people to get their attention. How else can you get my attention? And give them some ideas. Can you, put your hand up? Or if they have the vocal ability, if they have the verbal ability, let's just start using the term excuse me a lot. Excuse me, I need your assistance. And that's something that you can model at home too. When you need him and he's watching TV, you can say, excuse me, I'd like your attention, or, you can put your hand up, but model those behaviors. And I think the same can be said for the idea of throwing things. Why are we throwing them, and what are we throwing? Are we throwing, candles in the living room, and that's just our way of getting attention? Or are we doing it because we're frustrated, and that's a way that people pay attention to you? Because I guarantee you, if I'm sitting in a living room and someone picks up a candle and throws it, it's going to get my attention.
Thank you, Ashley.
Thank you, Ashley. I'm sorry. I'm using a different computer, so I'm a little slow on the
that's
uptake
okay.
here. I think also the points you were making are great for a kid who is not verbal. Maybe some kind of an assistive technology might be very useful, or some kind of a I don't know, some kind of a, what do you call it, pick?
PECs, yeah, so
Yes,
absolutely.
exactly.
And I think that if the student we're talking about in this setting doesn't have the verbal capability, we need to communicate with them the same way he communicates back with you. So if the language you're trying to give him is excuse me, then we should make sure he has one of the PECs that says excuse me. And if we don't have one that says that, then we need to use that language the way that it's presented to them and prepare for that. And we, if he doesn't use assistive technology like that, it's as simple as teaching him, when I need your attention, I'm going to raise my hand.
Or sign.
Yep, or sign it. I'm going to sign excuse me. I'm going to sign help, maybe. That's a good one that they can use, because it's very clear to say, I need you to do something for me right now.
Right. Now we have another question here, possibly from a teacher who is saying that in a classroom of 22 other children in the room, you're in the middle of a lesson, and the child decides she always says, she, I like that, she doesn't want to listen and starts annoying children sitting nearby. So I'm thinking that she actually states that she doesn't want to listen anymore, or maybe that's an assumption that we need to talk about. And she starts annoying children sitting nearby after having had optional seating, which I'm thinking she probably had preferred seating. I'm not sure exactly what, Nancy, you're saying, and you might want to be more, clarify that a little bit. But do you want to address that and
Yeah,
see
absolutely.
Put our thinking caps on?
So I'm going to come at this from kind of two different ways. And one is that if the student is having pretty consistent behaviors, have we utilized some of the resources at school? So have we done a functional behavior assessment? Have we seen, is there a trigger? Is this a student somebody who might need frequent breaks? And can you plan for those ahead of time? So I don't know what kind of support you have in that classroom, if there's a paraprofessional, if there's somebody who can, take her on a quick walk and, come back if she's exhibiting, I call these kind of break behaviors, like she's telling you flat out she is done listening and she needs a break. So if there's a way to plan for that, that's probably how I would recommend going about it at first. And if this is a student who has an IEP, are we looking at what it talks about in behavior and what strategies we have in place? If not, I wonder if it makes sense to, acknowledge the fact that she's having trouble listening and give her an opportunity to take space somewhere. So maybe, when she is having a trouble listening, or when she's done, or doesn't want to pay attention, isn't interested in what's going on, she removes herself from that space and does something more preferable to her. And I know what people are thinking is, okay, so we're going to let her get away with this. That's not what I'm saying at all, but we're also thinking about the 21 other kids in the class. So where can she go in the classroom? What if instead of sitting at her desk and listening, can she go sit on the floor on the beanbag and, you know, maybe grab a book, and she might be listening a little bit in the background. But I think we have to look at the environment and the situation and figure out what's causing that behavior. Are we just done listening? Is there some sensory stuff going on? Are we, you know, is her attention span up at that point? So use those resources around you at the school. Thank you.
Thank you. Just so that you know, the person who we were speaking about before, the 16-year-old strong young man, she did say that it was that she felt that the behavior was in anger, that he is verbal. So I would probably say we should probably find out why he's angry and what's creating that anger.
You know, I think that that's definitely a good point. So if it's not out of frustration, if he has the language to use it, I would start thinking about how our brains shut down when we're stressed out. And sometimes even if we know the skill, if we know, okay, I'm not supposed to throw things when I'm angry, when our brain shuts off like that, we don't really have the choice. And so we revert back to this kind of fight or flight mentality. And the fight would be the grabbing your arm, the throwing things. And so what I would recommend is to wait until that student is in a good space, is not angry, is not upset, and say, hey, you know what, I was just thinking, yesterday it seemed like you got pretty upset and you threw something, and that's really not safe, and I want to come up with a way that we can help you feel better and not do those things. What do you think we can do? Let's involve him in that. What is he angry about? Is it something that's in your control or out of your control? In his control or out of his control? And does he have something that he can use to manage his anger better? So does he like music? Does he like, you know, media, or does he have a cell phone that he can, you know, play a game on or do something when he's feeling angry? But the time to figure that out is not going to be while he's throwing things at you. It's going to be while he's in a good space and while he's, you know, pleasant to talk to. And then also kind of if you know that and we can plan and prepare for it, then maybe if there are certain things that cause an angry outburst like that, maybe we try and create a situation or create an environment where there are less things that you can throw and hurt someone with. And I know that sounds hard. It's like, I don't want to redecorate my house because my kid has anger issues. But really, if we're looking at it from a safety and from a flexibility standpoint, that might be the best way to go about it.
Thanks. Okay, so now we have a little guy, actually I don't know how old he is, but he has inflexible thinking skills, and he feels disrespected by those around him, including his teachers, gets into disagreements all the time, and it's hard for him to respond to what people are asking him to do. Now at school they're complaining that he's rude. And he is coming out at each other because he's not able to be a team player and receiving detention. Oh boy, this is only getting worse. So she wants to know, how could I bring this to the school for them to understand a little bit more about why he's doing what he's doing?
Sure. I think that brings up the whole idea of a functional behavior assessment again. And for most of the kids and most of the people that are listening to this, if you have a child with behaviors that hasn't had an FBA before, it is a great idea. It is something you can put in writing and request from your school district. So all you need to do is put a letter together that says, I'd like to request a functional behavior assessment, and send it to the school. For this student specifically, and I work with tons of kids that don't have the flexible thinking, that don't understand, and if he's getting punished for it, which is what detention is, and if people are thinking that he's rude, I would first want to make sure that he knows what he sounds like when he acts that way. So can he recognize what rude sounds like from a peer or from you as the parent or the teacher? So, you know, does he understand your change in tone of voice? Does he understand all of that? And for some kids that I've worked with, I've responded to them in a rude way. And it's not necessarily that I'm modeling rude, it's that I'm saying, hey, do you know this is what you sound like when you talk to me? And making sure he understands how his behaviors are impacting other things. So he has, you know, does he want friends? it's really hard to keep friends and to have friends when you're rude. Nobody wants to hang out with you. And I think it's okay to say that, to say, hey, you know what? It's really hard to be your friend when you act that way. And do you understand why that is? And again, we're not going to try and do this while he's in that situation. It sounds like he also has maybe some perseverative things going on where he's talking about the same thing all the time. Does he understand that other kids don't share that interest with him? And I would probably start with him in making sure that he does have these skills, that he does understand these things before we move on. And you can ask the school to partner with you with that, to say, to acknowledge and say to him when he acts rude, use the term rude if that's the word that you're going to keep using. Say, you know what, what you're saying is rude. And that way we're bringing it to his attention and we're coming up with ways for the school to be part of the solution rather than just issuing detentions. And I'd also wonder, does he have a diagnosed disability, and are some of these social cues and issues that he's having related to the disability? And if they are, then we should really look at the idea of detention as a whole, because then we're kind of punishing him for a skill that he doesn't have because of his disability.
And that means, of course, going back to the IEP and maybe writing a goal around the behavior.
And you can always, because I work in the call center and we get a lot of questions about FBAs and behavior assessments and things, you can always give us a call here. We can explain that process a little bit better.
Okay, so the mom is actually writing as we're talking. But I just want to give a quick shout out to Wendy, who's again online with us, and thank you, Wendy. Your comments have been wonderful. But she does have a question: can an FBA be done with a child who is on a 504? And I don't know the answer to that.
Yes, it can. So I know a lot of students actually who get an FBA. It's not necessarily the type of evaluation that's done as part of an IEP naturally. And if the student's not on an IEP, you can, even if your student's on a 504 and you want to request any type of evaluation, you can. So just keep that in mind, that you can request any type of evaluation you want, regardless of their IEP status, as long as they haven't, just had a similar one done. But absolutely. So I would type that letter up right now and send it to the school this afternoon and get that started, because the FBA process can take a little bit of time. There's a lot of observation that goes into it and a lot of parent feedback and teacher feedback. So the sooner you can get that started, the better.
Okay. And it is about, it's exactly 1:30. I just have one more question because
Sure.
I'm interested in it personally. And it's from somebody who is a teacher who has ABA and collaborative problem solving training.
Great. Good for you. Teach me some things.
Really. And let's see, she's asking for tips to support a collaborative problem solving style program, while other students are on a strict ABA program. And I know this is, I've had other people say that these don't always jibe.
Yeah.
And she says that she's been trying and has been successful, but she has two boys that demonstrate similar behaviors like swearing and spitting. I've known a lot of those kids.
Me too.
And she's responding differently based on their needs, program style, and diagnosis. That's tough for a teacher to have that going on all the time.
It's definitely,
God love you.
Yeah, it's definitely that individualized piece of it, and I think that what I would probably recommend doing is keeping, if the IEP says, or if the diagnosis requires that you're using more of an ABA philosophy, is there a way that you can work in a little bit more of the collaborative problem solving? Can you kind of mix these two things together? So for instance, if we're trying to, I know for those of you that don't know, collaborative problem solving goes back to Ross Green, so you can learn all about that in The Explosive Child. But what I think that makes it a little bit difficult is that with ABA there's this is what you do and this is what you do next. And in collaborative problem solving it's more, okay, this is what you did, now what should we do next? And if there's a way that you can kind of mix those two things together, and so for instance if it's spitting that we're talking about, we can say to them, spitting is not an okay behavior, it's gross and it's unsanitary or whatever. Make sure they understand why it's not okay. And then say to them, what can we do instead? what can we do instead of spitting when we're frustrated? Or how about we do this instead, and then use that, whatever the ABA strategy is, but it's almost like you're still involving them in it. You're not saying you're not going to spit, you're going to do this. It's we don't want you to spit, how about we do this? And that's the choice that they have. Give them those two, or if you can add in another choice based on the ABA, I would probably try and mix the two together and then see if you can get the students to model the good behavior for each other.
I think that's a great idea, and I am going to a conference this week around collaborative problem solving and the neurology of things like trauma, so I will bring that up.
That sounds great. And then just send us your email, we'll send it back to you.
All right, I think we're done, I think, Emily, you have sent out the address for people to look at the actual recording of the PowerPoint with our voices. And we'll put it in the SurveyMonkey that is coming along, yes. So I'll also post to everybody that has attended the actual PowerPoint so that you'll have a hard copy of it also. And we'll see you next month, and thank you so much.
Sounds great.
Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for having me.